Thank you for joining us for another power-packed message provided by Munroe Global Incorporated and MunroeGlobal.com. We transform followers into leaders and leaders into agents of change. We hope that this message is a blessing to you as you advance your life and discover your purpose. Now, let's go into the message.
We're going to talk about rediscovering the mission of the church. If Jesus was here in person, I believe this is what he would talk about today. Let us talk about rediscovering the mission of the church. This entire month, I'll be dealing with mission, vision, and goals. As we begin this new year, we have to remind ourselves of why we exist. And then next week, this week is Mission Day, next week is Vision Day, and the following week will be Goal Day. And we're going to be focusing in the ministry, reminding ourselves as to why we are here, why this ministry was born, why God gave birth to this place. And in this segment, we want to focus on mission, the mission of the church. I'm not talking about our church fellowship here. I'm talking about the church globally, as they call it universally. There is only one church. Only one. Jesus has only one church. There are many different expressions of this complex thing we call church. And much of those expressions are doing a fairly good job. There are facets of the church that are still confused and still trying to identify and recover the truth as to why they exist. But I want to focus this morning on understanding the kingdom assignment of the church, which is really the ultimate and original assignment of the church. So as you take notes today, I want to begin with some general statements. And that is the original plan of God. Remember that the church was a product of the fall. Write that down somewhere, please. The church is a product of the fall. Now that may sound a little bit confusing to some of you, but before Adam fell, there was no need for church as we know it. And let me just caution myself here. There was church before the fall, but not the church as we know it. As a matter of fact, God created church when he created Adam. Adam is the name that God gave to the being of race of people that he created. The word church, can I define it for you? Write it down. Church is from the Greek word used by Jesus. It's the word ekklesia. I will spell it for you. It is E-C-C-L-E-S-S-I-A. Write it down because it has to do with you. The word church is an English word that translates from the Greek word used by Jesus in Matthew 18. And it's the word E-C-C-L-E-S-S-I-A. Ekklesia or ekklesia, depending on which part of the Atlantic you're from. The word ekklesia does not mean, has nothing to do with a building, pews, pulpit, choirs, band, music, dancing, worship. It doesn't. The word ekklesia is not a word that was invented by Jesus. The word ekklesia was a common word used in the day of Jesus 2,000 years ago, and it was a political word. The word church, ekklesia, is from politics. The Romans were ruling the world during the time when Christ came to earth in the flesh. The Romans actually ruled all of Europe, even as far up as England. They took over all the way down to the Mediterranean. They were ruling all of the world. I mean, it's a powerful empire, Rome. And Rome conquered the Greeks. The Greeks used to rule the world. And then the Romans conquered them, and the Romans took over. Now, the Greeks were philosophers. They were thinkers. And that is why much of our philosophy today can find its roots in Greek thought. When you go to college today, it's required that you study certain Greek thinkers. Some of you may remember them, great ones like Aristotle, Socrates, Plato. These Greek thinkers were the ones who summarized thought, and they studied human behavior. One of the things they dealt with was human government. Matter of fact, the word demokrate is a Greek word invented by Plato and Socrates. These two thinkers were the ones who developed the concept of governing. They studied and thought through how the masses could be controlled, and they came up with this program or this concept, this idea called demokrate, where we get our word today, democracy, from. Democracy is a Greek idea. The Romans, when they took over the Greek Empire, they didn't destroy the Greek thought. They preserved the Greek writings. They actually adopted them. As a matter of fact, the Romans were very barbarian until they took over the Greek philosophy, and they became very intelligent because they took the Greek information and made it their doctrine, and they applied it. And that's why the Romans ruled the world more effectively than any other empire in history, more effective than the United States. Matter of fact, there has never risen an empire yet that can compete or compare with Rome, because the United States does not rule the world. They only rule 51 states, probably 52 now. And the Romans ruled the entire world, the known world. I mean, all of Europe was under Rome. As far as Africa was under Roman influence. These were powerful people because they applied the Greek concept of governance. A part of the Greek philosophy was this concept they developed called ekklesia. Ekklesia is a Greek idea which described a group of people that was selected or appointed by the king or the emperor, and this group of people was responsible for executing the mind and the dictates of the king or the emperor throughout the empire. That group that was appointed by him was given this name, ekklesia, which we call church. The Roman Empire, therefore, had church. What's church? A group of people appointed by the king or the emperor, whose responsibility it was to get the emperor's mind, the emperor's ideas, the emperor's desires, the emperor's dictates, and then to turn those ideas and dictates into practical policy and legislation, and then to execute them throughout the whole empire so that the entire empire could do what the king was thinking. That group that was charged with that responsibility was called ekklesia, which we translate as what? Church. Is that clear? That group, therefore, was not a worship group. It was not a group that met in a building and had services. That was a legal, political agency. It was a group like a cabinet of the emperor. Their job was to make the whole empire manifest the mind of the emperor. Now, when you read book of Matthew, chapter 18, which might be good for us to practically see this. If you can turn there with me, Matthew chapter 18, you find Jesus using the Greek concept to define and describe his mission. And here's what he says. And by the way, he is adopting a Greek concept to explain a divine position. Let me just stress while I'm at this that Jesus is not becoming a Greek. Okay? What he's doing is he's using language that the people understood to explain concepts they couldn't understand. In the book of Galatians, chapter 3, don't turn there, there's a description that the Apostle Paul gives about the timing of the coming of Jesus. And listen carefully, this understanding changed my whole life. Do you know that according to biblical chronology, Adam fell just over 6,000 years ago, according to biblical chronology. In other words, man is not really old. He's only about 6,000 years old, according to the Bible. Now, the earth might have been older than that. It might have been a few million years. We don't know. And the day of the Lord is like 1,000 years, so at least we could add 7,000 years before Adam if we calculate what the Bible says a day could be to the Lord. Is that clear? So we really could have been, the first 7,000 years, God created the heavens and the earth and planned everything in the universe. And then at least the planet and solar system here, 7,000. And then from Adam's creation, which is 6,000 years ago, to now, we're just about to hit 14,000. Matter of fact, 2002 kind of brings us into the last seventh day of God. Adam fell in Genesis chapter 3. God made a promise in verse 15 that he would send the seed in a woman who would crush Satan's head. So the promise was made when? Genesis chapter 3. How come it took so long for the promise to come to pass? It took the promise 4,000 years, according to chronology, for the promise to come to pass. Why did God wait from Genesis to Matthew to bring Jesus? Why did God wait from Genesis 4,000 years afterwards for him to come in the flesh? What was he waiting on? Why did he take so long? I mean, why did he have to use all of these prophets to keep reminding us he was coming? Because maybe he might have forgotten. Matter of fact, that's what prophecy is all about. The prophets came to really remind us that what he said in Genesis 3:15 is still valid. They came and they kept saying, there's coming one, there's coming one, there's coming one, he's coming, he's coming. So when you read the book of the Old Testament, you're really reading the reminder that he's coming. Don't get too caught up in the Old Testament, stories and stuff. The big deal is really about the coming of the Messiah, the solution to man's problem. Then it says in Galatians 3, in the fullness of time, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the curse of the law, that they might be the righteousness of God in him. When did God send him? In the fullness of time. Now, the fullness of time has nothing to do with a clock or an hour. The fullness of time is a term used which has to do with when everything was right. Are you following me? Write that down, please. One of these days, you're going to teach a Bible study or teach a message, and you're going to remember that because that's an important statement. God deals with fullness of time. Matter of fact, your life in God's program has to do with fullness of time. Some of you want to do something right now. God is saying the time ain't right. Everything ain't in position yet. Sometimes you want to get married. You want to get married. God says, no, if you get married now, some things ain't in the right place yet. And if you get married now, you're going to mess up the whole thing. So God deals with not time. He deals with fullness.